Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, and once again, Christy is not joining me today. She is frantically packing. She's off to Disney World here tomorrow, and then going to be going on a double-dip cruise aboard the Disney Dream, and so stand by to hear all about that when she gets back. But this is a show that I'm really excited to bring to you. I was playing around, I think just on social media one night, and I stumbled upon this book that was just recently published, and I reached out to the author, and he has agreed to come on, and it's a book I'm really excited about to let you guys hear about. It's The Joy of Cruising, written by Paul Thornton. He is an award-winning author, a grand prize winner of the 2017 North Street Book Prize, and he was also just recently announced as a medal winner for the Florida Authors and Publishers Association by the President's Book Award. I'd like to welcome to the show today Paul Thornton. How are you doing today, Paul?
Oh, I'm just fine, and I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. And we're going to talk a little bit about your book here in just a second. I really enjoyed reading it. It's just a great book with so many cool stories about different people and different angles of cruising. But I thought we'd start with just a little bit of background of you. I think you've got an interesting background to begin with. When did you first start cruising? And I know it kind of talks about this at the beginning of the book, so I don't want to give away too much of it, but how did you find cruising, and when did you start?
Well, I'm going to date myself because my first cruise was a long time ago, 1988. And it wasn't the maiden cruise, but I think it was the second or third cruise of a ship called Sovereign of the Seas, which was truly a game-changing ship. It kind of ushered in the era of mega ships. But before I talk about Sovereign, the way I got to cruising, I was big in the 80s. I was big on all-inclusive resorts in the Caribbean, Jamaica, Bermuda. You know, these are resorts where you get, all your food, all your alcohol, all your activities, all your entertainment. And so I just love the notion of all you can, all you can eat and all you can do. And there was just something about that really grabbed me. And then I found out that you could do pretty much the same thing on a cruise ship, except that it came along with the benefit of being able to see more than one destination. Now, I recognize, of course, it's, you're only going to be at a destination, a day or less than a day, whereas at an all-inclusive resort, you'll be there all week. But, it had everything all-inclusives had, plus a little more. So that's what kind of encouraged me to try cruising, although I tried it with, a bit of trepidation because I'm not a water person. I was raised in inner city New York, in Brooklyn, and so I never saw water much as a kid. I never learned to swim. I did go to Coney Island a lot, and some of your listeners will be familiar with Coney Island. That's an iconic place in Brooklyn. It turns out it was only 6 subway stops from where I went to junior high school, and so it was a enticing place for young truants. So we went to Coney Island a fair bit, but other than Coney Island, I just never saw water. So it took me a while to go ahead and try a cruise, but I'm so glad I did.
Did that cruise leave out of New York, or did you have to fly down to Florida for it at that time?
No, it left out of Florida. So I was living up north, but not in New York. I was living in Delaware.
Okay.
But yeah, it left out of Florida.
And you kind of touch on it in your book a little bit, and I think that, the more I talk to people, on our podcast, and I know just my own situation, a lot of people, they don't know what to expect for that first cruise. And I had some trepidation even going on the first one. We went with my wife and some friends. And what was it about cruising? Now, obviously, you enjoyed the aspect of, the all-inclusive food and being able to travel. But what do you think it is about cruising that hooks people and makes them want to come back?
Well, once I got on it, everything was first of all, it was a lot more luxurious than any of the all-inclusives that I had gone to. And they were all pretty nice ones. But this, as I said, Sovereign of the Seas was truly a unlike any ship out. It was much larger than the largest ship at the time. And it was, it was state of the art. It had a high-end shopping mall, a high-end casino, gorgeous, very photogenic vantage points, sweeping staircases and atriums. Now, in talking to some seasoned cruisers who were on that cruise with us, that's how we learned that it was unlike any ship that they had seen before. So it was just being in that environment. I said, "Oh, we've got to do this again." And I have never gone back to an all-inclusive resort since then. Really?
So you went all in from there, and from that point on, it was just cruising that kind of caught your attention.
Yeah. Once I found that I didn't get sick, because that's another thing that caused me. I took some pause at taking a cruise because you spend all of this money, and at the time it was still a lot of money, but especially in 1988, that looked like a lot of money to me. Mm-hmm. And I said, what if I spend all that money and then I get on the ship and I get seasick, or my wife, or she was my date at the time, she wasn't my wife, what if one of us gets seasick? And so once we did the cruise and we're just in awe of the surroundings and the beauty of it and didn't get sick, I knew that's what that's how we were going to vacation. And so we did. And then the other thing too, in 1988, cruising, they had like a midnight buffet and all these ice carvings and butter sculptures and chocolate fountains of chocolate. I mean, it was, and then on formal nights, it seemed like every night was formal night. I mean, you dressed up all the time. A lot of those things have kind of gone by the wayside, but back then it was magical.
Before we talk about your book, just kind of continuing the theme, what are some of the more memorable cruises you guys have been on since you first started cruising in 1988?
Most of my cruises, they're great for families with children. And so I have two daughters, and so I took them on a lot of cruises, and really it was more for them to have fun. I enjoy watching others enjoy themselves. And so it was just a series of cruises. The destinations weren't all that important to me. I don't really remember any destination that stood out for me. Probably because all of my cruises have been sort of just kind of touristy, trips to the Caribbean. I haven't gone to any place exotic yet. As a result of interviewing and profiling all of the people I did for the book, though, that has encouraged me to broaden my horizons. And so I'm going to go to some, I have on my list all of these places I want to go to. But all of my cruises have been to the same places I used to do all-inclusives. So I've been to Jamaica on cruises. I've been to the Virgin Islands. I've been to Mexico. So there really wasn't any one destination that was particularly special for me. It was really, I get more out of being on the ship than I do at the destinations, to be honest with you.
I like that theme of, just spending time with your family too, because I mean, that's what it's really meant for us. We've enjoyed the destinations, but I think for us, with our kids being a little bit younger, right now, they're kind of all caught up in electronics and everything else. And it's the one time I feel like as a family, we can kind of all unplug and just spend time together. So I really like that idea of you and your family cruising along and just kind of watching their experiences as you went.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned unplugging. Of course, as my kids were growing up, there was no such thing as iPads and iPhones and all of that. But it's funny. Literally just yesterday, I was on a cruise group on Facebook, and someone asked a question or made a comment about unplugging on cruise lines, and I'm one of those folks. I'm like, an iPad is attached at the hip for me. And if I had to totally unplug on a cruise, I probably would jump overboard. So yes, I enjoy being with my family, but I place a high value on being connected. And part of that, part of it there's a practical side to that. For the last, I would say, 4 years, I have been in the process of writing and researching a book. And so there's no better office than the ocean, having the ocean as your office. And so, when I say I'm always connected, most of the time it's writing and researching, although sometimes I'm just browsing the internet.
Well, let's turn to your book then. I've got a couple. Well, if you don't mind, I've got one other question for you, I guess, before we turn to your book. You kind of talked about formal night, then midnight buffets, kind of going away. What other kind of big changes, since you started in 1988 to now, have you noticed? How has the cruising industry changed in your mind for either the good or the bad? I mean, for either the good or the worse, I guess.
Well, for one thing, clearly the audience on cruises are getting younger. Back in 1988 and in the early 90s, you tended to see, it tended to be an older demographic. Of course, as I said, I would, bring my young daughters on the cruise ship. But now it seems like it is as much a family-focused form of travel than it is anything. So I would say one of the very conspicuous differences between now and back then is you just see a lot more younger people. And the ships are now catering to that much younger crowd. So you see things like, you probably have heard there's a cruise ship coming out that's going to have a roller coaster on it.
Oh yeah, I can't wait to see that.
Yeah, I went on a cruise. In December that had a skydiving simulator and a surf simulator, and so you see all of those kinds of things, and clearly they are targeting millennials. So that's a major change. In the old days, cruising was kind of, the tradition that you would see like in old-time movies like Titanic, whereas today it's all about, or at least for the younger demographic, it's all about activities.
We followed the Bliss quite a bit that Norwegian built as it came up to Alaska last year, and they've got the racetrack on the back, which that just looks like a lot of fun. So
yeah, that's on my list.
So what are some of the cruise lines have you been on then, Paul?
Well, as that first one, of course, was Royal Caribbean, and it's funny because, in fact, the way the book is organized, the first chapter talks about that first cruise, and then the last chapter talks about my last cruise, which was on Christmas of 2018. Well, that first cruise was Royal, and that last cruise, the last cruise I did was Royal. So that Christmas cruise was a return to Royal Caribbean after 30 years.
Wow.
Yes. But in the interim, I've gone on most of the cruises I went on with my daughters, or all of the cruises I went on with my daughters, were Carnival.
Okay.
And Carnival caters more towards families. Carnival is cheaper. So we've gone on a lot of Carnival cruises. About 4 years ago, I have two grandkids, and my cruising life now is defined by my grandkids. So I took my grandkids on their first cruise on Disney Dream. So we've been on Disney. I've been on Celebrity. I've been on Norwegian. Let's see, did I miss anything? Celebrity, Carnival, Royal Caribbean, Disney, Norwegian. I think I got them all.
Perfect. So you've had just a wide swath of, seeing all different aspects of the cruising industry today. So let's kind of turn to your book. What was it about cruising, and where did you get the idea to kind of come up with the idea of this book and profile all the different cruisers that you did?
I really happened upon it. It wasn't something I set out to do. As I mentioned, I started cruising with my grandkids 4 years ago. So every summer they come down. I'm in Florida and they're up in Delaware, and so they come down every summer and we try to catch a cruise. So in the last 4 years, we've done or in a few weeks it will be 5 cruises in 4 years. So that's it's not a whole lot, but that's a fair amount of cruising. And what I do when I cruise is I get online and I browse and I research. And what I found, Steve, in the process of researching, I started realizing just how passionate cruise enthusiasts are. So passionate that I actually got more interested in reading about the exploits of others than I did in researching the cruises that I set out to research. It probably started with a discussion thread on one of the groups or maybe on a Cruise Critic site, and someone just asked a question, how often do you cruise? And I just started reading some of the responses, and I was flabbergasted. First of all, you had people who cruise, 3 and 4 and 5 times a year, which is high to me. Mm-hmm. But then what was really astounding was they would add a statement like, I plan to do a lot more when I retire. So they're doing that while they're working. And I said, wow. And then, then there were some extreme cases. This one guy said, well, I did 16 cruises. I do 10, 15, 16 cruises a year. And so, that just amazed me. And then on this one Facebook group I was on, I saw a guy, he made a post, and it was now by this time I'd already started to write the book, but he made a post, and it was early in 2018, or middle of 2018, and he said, we just got back from our 11th cruise, 10 more to go for 2018. And wow. So I mean, I am not exaggerating. 21 cruises in 1 year, and of course he got an unbelievable amount of feedback. The last I looked, that particular thread, he had 900 responses.
Wow!
And back at the time when I was writing, during the course of writing the book, I would read every single response. I stopped at around response 600. but anyway, I messaged the guy, and I said, I told him what I was doing, and I said, can we talk? And I didn't expect him to respond. Well, he did. He's from Australia, and his story is in the book. Now, let me point out that every story in the book, I'm not just about trying to find people who cruise a lot. The book is about more than just volume. It's about people who have a story to share. People who, there are a couple of people in the book who before they had a story that was worthy of reading about, they had never cruised before. So it's not just people with a high volume of cruises. It's something special about their cruising story. But anyway, that's how I got the idea. Just realizing, learning that there was a whole subculture out there that I wanted to learn more about.
And I think a lot of projects end up that way. I mean, to be honest, that's how I started this podcast, was I would just we just fell in love with cruising and with our family Disney Cruise Line. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of places. There were some places here or there where people talked about it, but I just wanted to find other people that were, kind of had a passion about it like I did. And I kind of feel like maybe it's the same with you as far as having this curiosity and this passion with learning people's stories and then putting it to paper and bringing out to the rest of us to find out about them.
Yes, I one thing led to another. Then I said, this book here, there's stories that need to be told, and so yes, that's how I got the idea. But it started out just a couple of discussion threads, but I started learning more and more. The more I peeled the layers of the onion, the more I wanted to learn.
So one of the things that I really appreciated as I started reading the book was all the different stories that you've put together. It's not just the volume of cruises, as you said, but, people like Joe Church, who has run a marathon on every single Royal Caribbean ship. I'm a runner, and I just couldn't imagine keeping track of the numbers of laps that you would have to do on some of those ships, but what just an amazing story.
And the interesting thing, Steve, is when I tell people about Joe Church and about the book, and I say, this guy has run a marathon on every Royal Caribbean ship. But then I add in, but that's not really the most amazing part of the story. And because you've read it.
Right.
But towards the end of that chapter, there's like, it just kind of blows your mind when you read, and I don't want to give it away for someone who might read the book, but there's a whole lot more to it than just the fact that he has run a marathon on every Royal Caribbean ship. And that's enough of a story in and of itself.
Definitely. Paul, thinking about all these stories, did you find a common thread amongst all these people as far as cruising? Was there something that was kind of similar amongst all of them, even though their stories are all different?
Not really. There's so much diversity in terms of what people's interests are, what makes their story special. The only common thread is that everyone that I profiled, not surprising, is addicted, is passionate about cruising. But I say to people, 9 times out of 10, after your first cruise, you're going to get hooked. I don't think I've ever run into I guess there's people out there who hate it, who despise it. I just haven't run into those folks. Now, clearly, some of the people in the book, and I asked every person I profiled, after their first cruise, did you get hooked right away? And some didn't. Some, it took the next cruise or the third cruise. But some, it was immediate. So that's the only common link I would say is everyone that I profiled is just addicted to cruising. I mentioned one person, and I'll talk about her. She is a godmother. She was the godmother of Independence of the Seas, and she was unique in that when her story became noteworthy in the cruising world, she had never cruised before when she was named godmother. So I call her story a modern day fairy tale. She was kind of picked from obscurity, and I don't want to, it's not really obscurity. I mean, she had nothing to do with the cruising world, and she was not a celebrity. Most cruise godmothers are celebrities. She was not a celebrity. Had never cruised before, but now, of course, she's addicted and she's passionate. And by the way, her plaque and her photo is forever going to be on the Independence of the Seas. So yeah, another guy I profiled in the book. I have a section in the book on theme cruising. So theme cruising, to me, I really love the whole notion of theme cruising because that's all about having two passions, a passion for cruising and then a passion for whatever the theme is. And so the theme can be anything you want it to be, because there's a cruise for people who like jazz. There's a cruise for people who like country and western. There's a cruise for poker players. There's a cruise for cat lovers. I'm talking about, the pets. It's called a Meow Meow Cruise, believe it or not. There's a cruise called the Elvis Cruise, and Elvis has been dead for I don't know how long, 50 years, 40 years.
Yeah.
But that's a sold out cruise. So there's a cruise, it's a theme cruise for everything. And so one gentleman I profiled, he is a top executive at a company that they used to do, you might remember these CD sets that you could buy. Mm-hmm. And they started seeing that their business was going down, and they decided to diversify, and they decided to put together cruises where artists in a particular genre of music would perform on the ship all week. So they've done like the Soul Train cruise and the Country Western cruise and the Rock and Romance cruise. Well, the guy who I profiled from that company, at the time they did their first cruise, and all of their cruises are sold out. He had never cruised before, and now he goes on every one that they do. So again, it's not about volume; it's about the quality of the cruise experience.
I'm just kind of wondering, so how did you come up with all of the people that you came up with? Obviously, following some of the threads, maybe on Cruise Critic, you find some of the examples through there. But how did you find some of these people, Paul?
Much of it was by luck, or not luck, but by persistence. So when I committed to write this book, I didn't have one person lined up to be profiled, not one. So, and as you know from reading the book, there's 32 profiles. So I just, I had a couple of people who I knew a little bit about, and I reached out to them early on. I knew that I wanted them in the book, and I'll be honest with you, several people, kind of blew me off, and I don't blame them. I mean, I was just a voice on the internet. And I actually used that line in the book, that I was a voice on the internet. One story, so there's a guy, he's my favorite stand-up comedian. His name is Alonzo Bowden. Some of your listeners might have heard of him. He won a season of the television series Last Comic Standing. And so he has a podcast, and I listen to it regularly. And I noticed, and I've been listening to it for years, and I noticed that a certain time of the year, he always does his podcast from cruise ships. So I had assumed that he was just, a comedian performing on a cruise ship, because, almost every cruise ship I've been on, they've had a comedian perform. Well, it turns out he has much more involvement than that. He's actually a cruise director for a themed cruise. It's called the Smooth Jazz Cruise. So here he was, my favorite comedian, and he also had, a very interesting cruise story. And so early on, I decided that I wanted to try to reach out to him, but I didn't know him. And I sent him messages on Twitter, on Facebook, email. I called his agent or his representative. I tried for about 3 or 4 months just to make contact. And finally, one day, he just said, he responded. And it was like, okay, who is this? And you could tell the way he responded. I mean, it was like, I was wondering, was he thinking I was a stalker? And so, so I make a joke about it. Or, I have an anecdote about it in the book. And again, I use the term, he probably, I was just a voice on the internet. There are also people I have reached out to on discussion boards, and they'll respond, and they just, curtly say, not interested, And even some of the people, Steve, who, I use the term, they blew me off. I think once I started to get some successes, the word kind of got around. And so some of the people, or a couple of the people who blew me off early on, who shall remain nameless, they changed their tune, a little later on. And I have one email from someone who was one of those who blew me off, and then in a later email said I would be honored to be in the book. So, once I started to get some credibility, a little bit of credibility, people came around. And then I had, of the 32 profiles in the book, about 9 of them are from UK. And, UK has a very active, vibrant cruising community. And, it's a smaller community, obviously, than US. And they know each other. They talk to each other. And I think once I got a couple of successes of people from UK, I had a couple of other people from UK who actually reached out to me, who I had never heard of. I had not reached out to them, but they heard of me. And so they contacted me. So one thing led to another. So I would say, half of the people in the book were the result of just cold calls. But others, I've had some referrals. I have one guy, one of my relatives is in a band. He plays bass in a band. And he mentioned a guy who used to be a rock star. He's actually won a Grammy. He played drums for Billy Preston, who some of your audience is going to know. Others of your audience are going to scratch their head and say, who's that? But you can Google him. He's known as the Fifth Beatle. And you can Google and find out why he's known as the Fifth Beatle. But anyway, so this guy who used to be Billy Preston's drummer, he now has an affiliation with Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. And he's known as Resident Jazz Ambassador. So he switched from, he used to play, Billy Preston played rock music. He now plays, he plays jazz. He's 70 years old. And so through my relative, he, facilitated an introduction to this person. And he's got a great story in the book. It's called The Legendary Manny Kilo. His name is Manny Kilo. And, you can see a YouTube video of him performing on Symphony of the Seas. And he's introduced by one of the other band members as the legendary Manny Kilo. And I'm sure the people in the audience are wondering, well, why is this guy legendary? I mean, he's good, but what makes him legendary? And I can remember seeing him 40 years ago, when of course I was a lot younger, and he was playing, rock and funk music. And I to this day remember the concert and I had tickets right up front, and I remember the concert that I saw him in. And so, once you read the chapter, it will become clear why he's called the legendary Manny Kilo. He's played with the Rolling Stones. He's played with Quincy Jones. He played, Billy Preston was the first music artist on Saturday Night Live. And so he was on that show. So that's, it's just all kinds of interesting stories.
Yeah, I mean, I even think about just when I contacted you. I mean, it takes a lot of persistence sometimes to get people to open up to you, and I'm so glad that they did, because as your book, as you kind of go through the book, there's just so many interesting stories. If you're a people person like I am, and I know a lot of people in our audience, and you love cruising, this is just an amazing book with so many neat stories that will just keep you interested, all night long.
And the good thing about it is you could pick up the book and you can read, chapter 26, and then the next day read chapter 4. So, I mean, it's not sequential. It's just stories. It's like an anthology or a compendium of stories.
And I love the pictures you put in there too. I think that was a nice touch to be able to see who you were talking about for people that you don't know.
Yes, yeah, and I tell you, what's the saying in Hollywood that was left on the cutting room floor? I have a number of pictures from the various people that I profiled that didn't make it in the book, and now I just wish I had put them in. So.
Well, that being said, do you see another book coming out of this one? As you kind of continue on, are there more stories that you want to tell to all of us out in the cruising industry to kind of hear those stories?
Absolutely. There are already, I would say, if there was suction for me to do a Joy of Cruising 2, or traction for me to do the Joy of Cruising 2, I probably have 5 or 6 people lined up already that I know would be profiled. So yeah, I would love to do a second book.
One of the last things I guess I have is, I think you talked to most of them about like their bucket list and what they'd want to do next. What were some of the things that people wanted to do that they hadn't done when you think about it?
Well, I'll tell you, that one was kind of a tough question for some of them because, like, for instance, the couple that did 21 cruises in 2018, they've been averaging, 10, 12, 15 cruises a year, and they've done it almost all. So, it's for some people asking them what their bucket list is. I mean, they've done it all. But there were some that came up over and over again. A lot of people mentioned Galapagos. Quite a few mentioned the Panama Canal. One person had done the Panama Canal, and I learned something because apparently you can do like a partially do the Panama Canal, and she now wants to do a full crossing on the Panama Canal, and I'm probably not articulating it well, but I know that you can do one lock or the whole thing.
No, you're saying that right, because we were looking at a Panama Canal cruise with Norwegian, and I was looking at it, and it left out of Miami, and it came back to Miami, and I was like, well, how does that work? Like, you go all the way through, and then you come back, but it's like you said, you just go through the eastern lock into the lake, and then you go back versus going all the way through it.
Right. I'll tell you what's on a lot of these very experienced cruisers' bucket lists, since they've done it all in terms of destinations, river cruising. And then one person I interviewed, she said something I at least had heard of river cruising, but she said something that was totally new to me, and it's called barge cruising. It's basically and authentic barge cruising is pretty much only in France, although there are some things that some lines or some ships that call themselves barge cruises here in the U.S. But barge cruising, it's really a converted, what you think of as a barge. What used to be an industrial barge that has been converted. Now, as barge cruising catches on, and by the way, these hold maybe single digits to low 20s in terms of people. So we're not talking about a lot of people. Gourmet meals, all your excursions are included. So the people who operate the barge, they not only cook the meals, but then when it stops, they shuttle you on the excursions and things like that. So that's barge cruising. So yeah, when you talk to people who have seemingly done it all, they come up with really, really unique ways to continue to pursue their cruising passion.
Well, as we kind of finish up here, Paul, is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know about your book before we talk about what's next for you?
I just think there's a story in there for everyone. It's not, and I'm not just trying to sell the book. I mean, I just think that I've had some people that I've run into who say, well, I'm not much of a cruiser. And it's not just marketing talk when I tell them you could still get into the book. It's not a guide. I haven't cruised that much. And most of your listeners, I'm sure, have more cruises than I do. So I'm the last one who's going to tell you how to cruise. It's not a cruising guide. If you're into people and you like travel, you can read the book and enjoy the book without having ever done a cruise. And even if you're like me, before I did my first cruise, and you were concerned about getting seasick, and maybe you've decided I'll never go on a cruise, it's still something that you would find interesting. Like the guy I mentioned with the legendary Manny Kilo, that story of how he went from being a rock star, a Grammy-winning rock star, to now a 70-year-old jazz drummer on the biggest ship in the world is just a really rich story. And there's a lot of other rich. I told you about the Godmother. Like I said, it's a modern day fairy tale. So there's just stories that anyone could enjoy, even if you're not particularly a cruising enthusiast. Although I know your audience are, for the most part, cruising enthusiasts.
Well, I really want to thank you for writing this book. I, for one, am always looking. I travel for a living, so I'm always looking for a good book to read along the way. I love cruising, obviously, and I really love people, and you've really put together so many unique stories between that similar line of cruising that I really want to thank you for taking the time to find their stories and tell these people's stories for all of us to learn about.
Thank you.
So, what's next for you? What's next on your list as far as a bucket list cruise? And I think I know the answer potentially, but because we kind of talked about it. But where are you going next, Paul?
Well, my next cruise is only 41 days away. It's a Caribbean cruise, and my grandchildren will be here in 7 days. So I'm counting down the days, both for them and for the cruise. And taking my granddaughter. My granddaughter's 9. She'll turn 10 on the cruise.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah. My grandson is going to miss out. He's 15, and he has to fly back to Delaware for football, summer football practice. And his dad is the coach. So
okay, so, he's going to make sure he doesn't miss any practices, right?
Yeah, so I'm not even going to go there and trying to talk his dad into letting him go on the cruise with us. So it's just going to be my granddaughter and my wife and I. So we're going to go to the Bahamas and St. Thomas and a first for me is St. Martin. I haven't been to St. Martin, so that stops in St. Martin. But one of the things that I got out of interviewing, I learned to broaden my horizons. So I just booked my first Mediterranean cruise, and that's next September. So it leaves out of Barcelona. Oh, by the way, Barcelona, I would say about 5 different of the people I profiled, about 5 of them said that was their favorite port. So I'm looking forward to cruising out of Barcelona, and then it goes to Cannes, France, and Rome, Italy. So that's the first of several bucket list cruises. Another bucket list cruise, not yet booked, but probably going to be after the Mediterranean cruise, will be Alaska. I mentioned Panama Canal. So yeah, I'm a cruising babe. I'm a baby at this. I got a whole lot of cruising in front of me.
Well, all of us here, just wish you the best as you go on that cruise with your granddaughter and then on into Europe next year and just continue to check off those bucket list marks. And before we finish out, Paul, where can people find your book and where can they connect with you on social media if they have any questions or if they just want to reach out in general?
Well, the book is available at all of your online retail locations, of course, Amazon, but Barnes & Noble, Google, iBook, or it's now Apple Books. So Kobo, pretty much anywhere you get ebooks at. Or for those who still are partial to paperbacks, you can it's available in paperback. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, So I'm very reachable. And what I love, absolutely love, and I experienced this with my first book. I love when someone sends me a selfie of them holding the book. So, so if any of your listeners get the book and they want to be on my website for posterity, just send me a picture holding the book, and you're going to be on my website.
If you're going out on a cruise here soon, bring Paul's book with you and get that snapshot down in St. Martin or down on the beach and, what your favorite Caribbean island.
And by the way, the website is simply thejoyofcruising.net.
Perfect. Well, as we finish up, once again, Paul, thank you so much for coming on our show and sharing this just wonderful book with our listeners. I hope everyone has a chance to go out and take a look at it and enjoy. And everybody enjoys reading it just as much as I have. And when you start start gathering those next stories, we'll look for The Joy of Cruising Part 2 then.
Once I commit to The Joy of Cruising 2, I'm going to have a chapter called DCL Podcast.
It would be an honor to be in it. Well,
how's that for putting you on the spot?
That means I'm going to keep doing the show. Well, thanks again, Paul, so much for coming on. I want to wish you once again, just have a wonderful cruise coming up with your granddaughter and family, and we look forward to talking with you soon.
Okay, Steve, thank you for having me.
Well, that's going to wrap up our show today. Once again, I really want to thank Paul for coming on and sharing his just amazing story, his cruising background, and then the story of publishing his latest book, The Joy of Cruising, Passionate Cruisers, Fascinating Stories. And you can find that once again on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and pretty much anywhere iBooks are sold, and in the stores themselves as well. And I'll make sure that I put his Facebook link on our show notes as well if you'd like to connect with Paul and kind of follow along. And we wish him just the best of luck as he is going to be down for the Florida Authors and Publishers Association. His book has already been picked to win an award, and he's going to find out what that is, which one it is, whether it's gold or silver, I believe, this Saturday at a banquet down in Florida. And then just have the best time once again, Paul, as you head out on your cruise with your granddaughter. Well, if you've enjoyed our show and you'd like to support it, I'd like to remind you once again, you can do so through our Patreon program. You can go to patreon.com/DCL podcast, and you can find out all the information there. And if you'd like to connect with Christy and I between now and our next show, you can always reach us over at Facebook, Twitter at the DCL podcast, Christy, of course, at packyourpixiedust.com, PackY, our Pixie Dust on Twitter, and Pack Your Pixie Dust on Facebook as well. So between now and our next show, if you are heading out on your next vacation, all of us here at the DCL podcast would like to wish you fair winds and safe travels as you head out on your next adventure. Once again, thanks for coming back and taking a listen, and we'll see you next time on the DCL podcast.